What can this AI do? Where does it act? What can it touch? And how far can it go?
Hello, and welcome to episode 100 of Generation AI, a podcast where we demystify artificial intelligence in the world of higher education and beyond. I'm your host, Ardis Kadiu, and joined with me today is always my co-host, Dr. JC Bonilla. Hey, JC.
Episode 100. And today we have a special one because we're continuing our three-part series, Ardis. We started this journey on the AI Buyers book. In episode 1, which actually was 2 weeks ago, so you can, just catch up. But we laid the foundation of how to make smarter AI buying decisions. It was a lovely conversation because today we're going to go tactical, but that first episode had a bit of a framework point of view. So today we'll talk about evaluation, vendors, compare tools, and we're going to go into how even go about budget chasing. But on episode 1, we took a slight different route. Should we just recap episode 1, Ardis?
Yeah, let's do that. I think for those listeners that have not, are just catching this one, you should definitely go listen to episode 1 of the series, but we'll do a recap so we can contextualize everything for you for sure.
So in the recap, we group our AI products in 3 categories. So we spoke about 3 categories for AI products as general assistants. This is the suggestion type of products. This is where ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, great for productivity, time to value, low integration lift. This is what probably all of us users of AI have experienced or entered our generative AI area. Number 2, you took us artists on but there's also agents and copilots. They look more like assistants, right? They live in app. They're constantly aware of their context hungry, right? And they help you make these decisions and support you. They look like Microsoft 365 Copilot or Canvas LMSs in your educations. For us in our technology, this is called Element Copilot. So we have our own agents and assistants, right? And they're fantastic, right? Because they are extensions to your team. But of course, and I'm going to let you recap this one because this is the big one. We spoke about workflow and agentic AI, this idea of the act in where reasoning lands as a product category. So can you just recap on what workflow and agent AI is?
Yeah, so the third category is the most advanced one. This is where AI systems act autonomously and agents kind of orchestrate multi-step processes across multiple systems, right? So we're talking about, agentic workflows that can work on your CRM, your SIS, LMS, and other data. An example, obviously, of this is, what we're calling our Bolt agents at Element or Salesforce's emerging Agentforce AI layer. It just happened that Salesforce had their Dreamforce conference this week as well. And no surprise there. They essentially are betting on Agentforce and kind of the agentic layer, and they're calling the agentic enterprise. And that's kind of they're labeling that, that thing forward as the agentic enterprise. You have also HubSpot, marketing AI features that are automating this multi-step campaigns and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So these workflow AIs, they really transform operations by automating these end-to-end processes, and they deliver a lot of measurable outcomes. So think about, in your case, you can think about increased enrollment or faster application processing or faster speed to lead or faster conversions. So that's kind of these agentic workflows and kind of what they allow you to do in this case. So in short, workflow AI, or what we're calling agentic AI, it's going to help deliver kind of the true transformation and the ROI in the enterprise, but it requires a higher level of commitment and readiness from organizations as well.
Yeah. On our episode, we refer to this commitment and readiness as an AI value chain. And as you move forward in this value chain, the promise to value, the impact probably higher, but also the investment of time. And what we always speak on these shows, the balance between the human and the technology. We had a fantastic conversation. Everybody, go back to our episode number 1 because we spoke about the 3 decision axes for evaluation. This framework brings the idea of how do you start thinking about evaluating a product under 3 important prompts. There's something called data gravity. Where is the truth? And here we're talking about what systems your AI is going to be connecting to, right, and reading from.
Yeah.
We also spoke about the action surface, where does it take action? Think about, what kind of things is going to be touching so it can suggest, assist, and go across systems. But of course, the autonomy ladder, this is where, how far you can let it to go. And then this is where, the third category of workflow and agentic becomes a reality. And yeah, like how much input do you want, humans and not, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the way, so the way that I interpret this three different axes, which are super super important, right? Is like the first, like where's the truth with the data gravity? It's like, and it asks, think about asking these questions to yourself, right? Like where the AI lives relative to your institutional data, right? The core question is, can the AI directly read and write to your systems of record, right? And that's really really important. So if an AI if an AI is operating far from the data, for example, a standalone app that just gets the occasional CSV file and exports the student info, it has this weak, what we call a weak data gravity, a likely limited impact. The closer it lives to the data, the more it lives in the system of record, the more context it has, the better. So that's kind of the way we're thinking about it. And that surface area that JC mentioned is, where does it take the action, right? Like where does it actually do that action? And it looks at how far the AI goes in the task pipeline. Is the AI simply making suggestions in a chat window, which is very low action surface, right? Or is it actually drafting content and performing subtasks inside an application for a human review, which is medium action surface? Or is it going even further and executing decisions and completing processes across systems? That's very high action surface. And then the autonomy part, like JC said, it's like how far can it go on its own, right? This is super important because related to action surface is the idea of autonomy. And does the AI only act with human oversight, or can it make independent decisions? So we define that spectrum from like we talked about it, like from an S0 to no autonomy to like an S3, like full autonomy. So for example, admissions AI could operate in an S1. So it's like suggestion mode, for example. It flags certain applications for at-risk students or for fraud, right? And suggest, it's like, okay, you can take certain actions in here. But then there's an S2, like where it can kind of assist with oversight. It actually sends an email and drafts an email to an applicant and, all of those things. And then S3 autonomously act. It sends messages and update records without waiting for any approval at all. So it's like, you think about like what the autonomy level is there. And that's super, super important. Because this kind of correlates directly with governance and control and kind of should you scale, like where should you scale the autonomy? How much do you trust it? And then the more freedom the AI has, the more you need guardrails and human checkpoints and clarity. So that's when you're evaluating vendors and how you're buying your AI, you got to ask those questions. And you got to have a pretty good understanding of where the systems fall and kind of those three. So I don't know, JC, does that, I feel like that's an area where we can now start building on top of and start thinking about, okay, like how do you think about translating that foundation and like that framework on the different AI, the decision axis, and then also kind of the types of work that they're doing to, okay, now let's translate it into vendors and like what are the questions that you want to ask before you buy?
Amazing. So let me recap on the recap. As the intent for buying AI emerges in you as a leader, right? These inner complexity and amazing things that I think we're talking about, the product categories and access come together in 4 questions, right? You need to come and be prepared to think about what can AI do, right? And this relates to the product categories that we discussed, right? Specifically, what are the problems that are going to be solved? And we're going to talk a lot about problems to be solved in our next episodes, right?
Yeah, you have to define the use case and not just a feature list. This is super important as you're evaluating. Think about like what the problems is that you're solving and what the problem that the vendor is solving or the AI is solving. Don't worry. The use cases are super important. Don't worry about the feature list. Feature list is like, features that change every single day. So it's not really important.
And a majority of you are probably going for the feature, not the use case. So that's a really important mind shift. Number 2, where does it act? This relates to the action surface, right? Specifically, think about the data that you're going to be asking your AI to collaborate with, to be the input. Is your AI, the output to the system. Like all those components are really, really important. And identifying the system of records of where AI needs to collaborate, because it may not be one, but it's a whole, infrastructure and ecosystem of data.
Yeah, exactly. Where that, like, identifying the system of record, like, basically this is where does the data live is super, super important. Like we've seen a lot of failed POCs because it's like the AI does these amazing things and there's like a really good workflow engine, but it's like, okay, now I need to connect it. Like it still needs manual data to feed it, or it still needs knowledge-based data that you have to load in as, separate questions, and it doesn't have access to send communication. So it's like you now need to export that data. So it's like it just becomes a mess when you start thinking about the AI not having that context. All right. So question number 3 is like, what can you touch, right? So who's in the workflow? Like map who uses it. Then this is a really, really important one. It's like map who uses it. Is it staff, faculty, or students? And what changes for them? Meaning like where are the changes right now? Like how does this change? Is because there's a lot of change management that happens in here. So who's in that workflow? You got to make sure that you kind of understand that, like what it can touch. And then the last one, how will the measure success? Like how far can it go in terms of the autonomy ladder, right? And then we're talking about how do you measure success? So this is super important. And then defining checkpoints for adoption and ROI before implementation, because yes, it can be very shiny features and they can come in. It's like you can be wowed, but then, it's not able to do some very simple workflow and then you're not getting any value out of it. So it sits on the shelf and the trust gets lost there. So if you can't answer those 4 questions, you're probably not ready to evaluate. So you're still exploring. So just kicking the tires. So make sure that you're able to answer those questions.
What can this AI do? Where does it act? What can it touch? And how far can it go? So this brings us to the topic today, Ardis, right? Because this topic is about bringing the clarity on this excitement, interest of acquiring AI. And the question at hand is, all right, how do I bring this clarity to action, right?
So when we look at the framing and evaluation process, you want to start with basically, let's start with why so many AI evaluations fail, because that's a really good point to start with.
Infamous,
it's like, okay,
95% of projects fail. Infamous, right? And we know it's infamous because the data collection is not fantastic, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes we're really good at identifying what works by, looking at things that have failed in the past and say, oh, we don't want to do things that way. So so looking at it from that perspective, like the MIT Media Lab found, I don't know if it was the Media Lab, but it was a different entity. So what they found was that, and this was a report that a lot of people are looking at, and even what was interesting, even at Dreamforce, Benioff, and one of the slides, he had he had this number, posted as one of the setup slides, where it says 95% of AI pilots deliver 0 value and measurable ROI, right? So that's what the report found. Yes, we can talk about like the slices and dices, or like what you can slice the report down, but ultimately there's a very, very high percentage that AI pilots fail. And that's staggering, right? In higher ed, the pattern is the same, right? Schools jump into an AI product. They don't know how to evaluate it, maybe because it's hot, or maybe they're being pressured by to kind of do something, and not because it's strategic, right? Or not because they have gone through the evaluation. And that's kind of what we're basically trying to kind of suss out is, you need to think about these different frameworks and think about where the value is and what success looks like, and so on and so forth. And that's what we're going to do in this episode, kind of give you a little bit more of that evaluation frameworks and why this AI why does it fail? So should we start from that?
Yeah, I just want to give one more point on framing. Remember, whether 95 or 75, a lot of projects are not succeeding, but it's not the technology, Ardis. The technology, it's not where these projects go wrong. That's not the problem, right? What we're starting to see, and it goes back to the framework, is we're starting to solve these problems through a different lens. Is the feature chase, shiny demos, versus what is the problems that we're trying to solve? So as we start thinking about the evaluation, what they failed, there's a mind shift that we need to represent, and that's basically what these different points are going to be.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So why do AI evaluations fail? So start with the tech, not the problem. So tools should map to pain points, and yeah, like reducing summer melt or cutting advising load, or like, you know what I mean? Like those are the things that start with that problem, come with that problem, and say, okay, how can we solve this problem with AI, and kind of where that's going to fit in.
It sounds so simple, artists, but we need to remember that there's an interplay between feature, right, and problem, right? So if I sometimes need to see the feature to get inspired, like, oh, that's how I can solve that problem. I always need to come to problem, right? But many of us see the feature and we stay in the pursuit of the feature, and that is basically the roadmap or the trend that we need to avoid, right? Tech can inspire, but at the end of the day, if not connected to a problem to be solved, summer melt to your point, or maybe advising loads, or how do I get them students to apply, open an application or come to an event, those are the problems, and then the feature comes in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So too many projects begin with let's try this AI tool and see what it can do, instead of here's a problem we can solve with it, and then AI, can AI help here? So according to that MIT report, it's actually not an NADA initiative research. So basically, they misidentifying the problem or use case is the common pitfall in all of the AI adoption and kind of buying AI. So companies often apply, and even institutions apply AI to low impact areas or issues that aren't a priority pain points. So they're trying to like, oh, let's just ease into it, or let's just do it in this area. So it leads to an underwhelming result. So it's, they're basically, starting from a failure in the beginning. It's like it's not really important, so they don't get the priority, and so on and so forth. So in higher ed, this might look like deploying a chatbot on your website because other colleges did it, but without thinking through like which students or staff pain point it's actually addressing, and how you're measuring the success, and kind of what data sources you're putting in there, and so on and so forth. So the second one I want to jump into is kind of what we call the shiny object syndrome, right? So this demo-driven roadmaps, and where vendors are really eager to show off their AI solutions with polished demos, and there might be gimmicky demos or whatever, and they're showing just one of those features, but it's not really a complete system. It doesn't do so. It's easy to be wowed by the AI, let's say, voice or writing or predictive analytics or whatever it is, like just one component of it. But remember that don't let a demo define the roadmap. Define your roadmap, then let vendors prove that they can meet it, right? So it's like where you're going and what you're doing should be based on like you should buy technology based on that strategic decision of where you're going. So don't let it has this feature, so we're thinking about like we're going to kind of implement that for us.
This shiny object syndrome and a demo that drives the roadmap. It's important. We recognize it a lot. There's also a sweet spot. I guess my contribution to this one is the sweet spot, artist. There's a process workflow that I do today, and now the problem that I'm trying to solve, if I apply this, would require me to change the process. This is called good old digital transformation. So it's important to recognize that sometimes you submit yourself to changing the process because the technology tells you to do that, and by you not solving anything,
right?
Versus now I'm going to solve the problem, but the technology and the demo-driven roadmap, if you will ask me to change my process. Very different things, and one is not the same than A is not equal to B in this case, right?
Exactly. So you have to, like, in practice, what this really means is like just draft what your desired workflows are and outcomes first, and then come to the table and say, hey, this is kind of what we have. So for example, if your goal is to reduce response time to students' inquiries or to pre-qualify them or whatever, like outline what's an ideal solution would do. Like, does it, like what are the different things that it would do? Does it answer, does it integrate with your CRM? Is it part of your CRM? What's the triage questions? Provide answers within 1 minute, escalate complex cases to staff, record the interactions. Like all of these different things that you want the outcomes, and then use that script to evaluate the vendors, right? So go through and say, okay, I'm evaluating you based on this use case, rather than being led by whatever features they have chosen to highlight during that demo. So a demo should prove the tool can do your job, you shouldn't be contorting your needs to kind of fit the tool ultimately. All right, so let's move on to the next one, JC. So the next one is around the idea of lack of checkpoints. So a lot of projects fail. So there's no checkpoints or metrics. So ROI, when we're trying these projects, another reason this pilots flounder is the absence of, basically, there's no success criteria and timelines. So the MIT study noted that many organizations have unrealistic expectations. It's like, I'm going to just dump the kitchen sink and say all these problems. I have all these problems. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You have to define them, and you have to be good about what they are. So they expect the ROI to also come in just like 2 months or 3 months, and for these projects, which are really unrealistic, and they need a lot more time. And the report suggests like anywhere between 12 to 18 months for some of these projects because if you're building it right, and if you're putting all these workflows, you can't really measure the lift on that inquiry timeline from last year to this year. You really need a few months. You really need a semester or whatever. You really need 6 months. So when results aren't immediate, projects get shelved, and this is a common failure. So to avoid this, it's crucial to define these checkpoints and adoption and ROI early, meaning that, hey, even though we have this big goal, maybe we want to break different checkpoints ahead and say, if the inquiry increase rate is higher, you want to say, okay, we want to have a checkpoint that by week 1 or by week 2, we answer 90% within this amount of time, and so on and so forth. And you have those different checkpoints in there. So the interim metrics keep the project accountable and signal whether you're on track. And successfully AI initiatives almost always have kind of this clear governance and success metrics from day one.
It's one of the toughest one, Ardis. Measuring and defining the measurement framework, it's difficult. So for all of you who are thinking about this, you're like, of course, I want ROI, right? Just know, as Ardis mentioned, the journey and the destination is equally important. What does that mean? That where we're going to end up is that the metric is that final ROI, but these checkpoints, the journey, it's equally important. Last thing I would say in terms of the middle point, whatever you thought about checkpoints measuring semesters doesn't work in AI, right? The checkpoints that we have are faster. And this is where Ardis is proposing weeks, right? I honestly believe that we can see checkpoints in accelerated way. And if anything, the ROI metrics and milestones would be also achieved faster. So have your ROI metrics, have your checkpoints, but also don't bring in your playbook of cloud computing and migrations that you would measure in semesters or years.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing that I want to say about like why this project fail, right? So we talked about like all the things that they fail. So the last one I would say it's, and this one is less glamorous topic, but it's the organizational readiness gap, right? So if you think about, it's vital because is your campus ready for AI? And this is super important. So the best evaluation framework in the world won't save you if your stakeholders aren't on board or data is in kind of disarray or in many different places. So many AI pilots fail due to internal issues. So there's data silos, there's no cross-departmental buy-in, or there's a lack of AI literacy even among your staff, right? Because it's like, how do you evaluate something? How do you know something is working when you don't understand like what the results supposed to be and how it works and so on and so forth. So, and what we talk to a lot of folks about is as leaders, you must assess your internal readiness alongside the evaluation of the tech. And here at Element, we have kind of these, we've done so many webinars and so many talks and conversations around AI readiness and how do you figure your organization is AI ready and how do you get people there. Maybe this was a conversation maybe a year ago, but even today, a lot of these things are failing, and they're failing to launch because people just don't feel comfortable. They don't know what to expect and how to think about it. And they're just like, they're frozen, right? Even though the thing like, so if you have this criteria and the team is ready, and the other thing is like, okay, you start questioning everything, right? Do you have this, you really need to understand if you have the people internal, like if you have the champion, internally. So you really need an internal team or champion prepared to manage these AI tools internally. Like ownership is a big part of that. And then the other part is like you had a really good presentation to our AI Engage Summit yesterday, JC, is around like, okay, are your policies kind of tidy up? Meaning that, do you understand like, okay, are these tools FERPA compliant? What's the data usage? What's the ethic components? Or do they need updating before you kind of go into this journey? And sometimes the evaluation process itself can help build that readiness. And that's what we're seeing on the element side, is that we're actually helping organizations become AI ready, because there's just so much teaching that we're doing in there. And then we're involving IT, we're involving the different organizational units. So asking those tough questions early is super, super important. But a lot of organizations can kind of get ready as part of the onboarding process as part of that. And we tend to do a lot of it.
Well, in terms of organization readiness, which is a foundational point, let me recap why AI evaluations fail, right? You're starting with the tech, not the problem. Demo-driven roadmaps that shape you, the organization, right? Lack of checkpoints. Of course, as you mentioned, the organization readiness may not be there. Now, this is all in the construct of what I was taught in my PhD as negative data, right? And you can do a lot of generalizations by looking at, when things don't work and things like that. Brad Rao taught me that. It was super interesting. We at Element ourselves, we go through this. We also see hundreds of organizations go through this. So I think it'll be fun to start looking at how does this generalize and how do we respond to this as a playbook, because one of the things that we bring in, and you just mentioned it, is we help organizations get ready. We believe that we also have a whole framework of how do we think about checkpoints and roadmap-driven demos. That's not what we believe in. And definitely, we start the day asking the questions of what is the problem that you're trying to solve. So can we map this out on how do we think about an element as it relates to making AI successful?
Yeah. So we do have a kind of evaluation lens, elements evaluation lens, or maybe a playbook for success, whatever you want to call it, right? So based on those lessons learned. So you start with the use cases always, and that's number one. And again, some of these things, like you're starting to repeat them because those patterns matter, and these things are really important. So we want to drill that down. So a lot of these patterns and a lot of these themes that come up over and over. So start with a use case. So identify a concrete problem or opportunity. So for example, we're losing 20% of admitted students for summer melt. We want to improve enrollment yield, or our advisors are overwhelmed and handle about 400 students. We need to augment advising, right? So that becomes the North Star. So evaluate AI solutions only in the context of how and if they solve this problem. If a vendor cannot clearly demonstrate that their product's impact on kind of your identified use case is there, it's probably not the right fit, right? So yes, they could do a lot of other things. They can be shiny or whatever, but start with a use case. Number two, map the product to the framework, meaning so categories and axes, right? So once you have a use case and you're kind of scouting solutions, place each option on the map. And kind of when we look at the map, basically you kind of start thinking about what category is it, right? Just like we told you. So think about the categories, the assistant, the copilot, or workflow AI. This tells you a lot about their potential integration efforts and so on and so forth. Like what's the data gravity, which we talked about? Does it connect to different systems? What's the action surface? Is it suggesting actions to staff, or will take full? And then what autonomy level is possible, and are you comfortable with that? So you have to map the product to the framework that we basically describe to you. So categories and axes. So start with use cases and then map the product to that framework in order. So by mapping these, so you're going to see which solutions are basically an overkill and which are underpowered, because that's going to give you you can map it out and you can see it's like, okay, this thing is costing us a lot of money, but it doesn't really, it's really underpowered to accomplish these things. So a small integration that only gives suggestions might be safe, but yields very low ROI. And an autonomous agents sounds great, but might demand a lot of data integration you can't support yet. So you might want to go for something that's more integrated within a ready system, a standalone. So the analysis prevents the common mistake of buying at the wrong layer, right? This is kind of the idea. So if you want to pay for a full AI platform, maybe it's simpler to just go with the Copilot plugin. They could solve, your immediate needs, or vice versa, right? You need a full AI platform because the integration of this like standalone tool, it's going to cost a lot more. It's going to be not deliver you the right value. So you need a platform that has all the context and everything else, like Element 451, and that's how we think about it.
To that point, that's where many of the projects that I see fail, because what the pain of deploying this product doesn't fit the use case in terms of, the category. So all of a sudden, like, you bring in all these issues, right? And then the clients go through this transformation, but there's a disconnect between all the things you needed to do for the outcome to the problems that you're trying to solve. And also in the solution, the roadmap is bigger. So in other words, you went for a full agentic workflow, and what you needed was an assistant, right? You needed summarization use cases. You need summarization products to satisfy the use case on application readouts for your counselors, and you went fully agentic, and you actually gave, a student admissibility using agents. That's a different, that is where product mapping fails. All right, fantastic.
All right, so shall we move on? I think so. So look, a final note to this, and obviously we can kind of go back to this, but a final note on kind of where we are. It's often said that we talked about 95% of these pilots fail, but the big reason is the lack of clarity, right? This is really the lack of clarity. So if you're thinking about it, just starting with clarity of purpose and starting with a rigorous lens to evaluate fit, it's much better. So you'll kind of set the AI projects to succeed in that case. So AI works best when it creates clarity, not noise. I feel like we're kind of in alignment on that one.
We are in alignment. And I think we're also eager to go even more tactical here. So let's bring in this to the landscape of, I have a framework, I understand what I'm looking for, all these things are being presented. So I'm speaking now vendor relations negotiation, and I'm maybe in the shortlisting of the 2 technologies I'm going to bring in. So how do I start shortlisting? How do I compare AI vendors specifically? If I were to group them, right, and I have these tools like ChatGPT that everybody uses, or I have this niche different things, or technology like us, Element 451, Ardis, like, think about the different layers. How would someone in student success answer, I need Element 451 versus ChatGPT? Think about that. So
yeah. So the first step to kind of group vendors by category and capability, right? And when you're evaluating, so if you're starting with your use case, it's really easy to start thinking about like, okay, well, how does that fit my use case? A lot easier to understand how that works, and then you can look at different vendors and say, okay, how much am I supposed to do versus like how autonomous this is, and so on and so forth. But based on our categories, like when we're categorizing it, it's like the first step is to just avoid the apples to oranges comparisons, right? Like you need to avoid that. Like a ChatGPT, which is an AI assistant, is not the same as a AI platform that does autonomous and has agents to do the work for you, like Element 451, like our Bolt agents. So those are 2 totally different things, right?
Well, no, what we're saying is Element 451 is better than ChatGPT. That's what we're saying, right?
No. I'm not saying that. So what we're saying is that ChatGPT fits it's a different category of need for AI,
right?
Which is an AI assistant. And this general assistance, every institution, it needs these general assistants. These are things that, your students are going to need. These are, your faculty members. So you have to give them access to a general platform, a general assistant platform. And this is kind of where we can come in and say, by definition, at this point, I believe that ChatGPT EDU is well ahead of the competition. Pretty far ahead of the competition, and it's kind of education oriented. There's the EDU version of ChatGPT. And then we've seen a lot of large institutions deploy it with 800 million users globally. I feel like ChatGPT has become the de facto AI assistant. Obviously, you have Google Gemini, and Google Gemini has impressed us quite a bit. So if you live in the Google ecosystem, you don't have to pay more. That just use the Google Gemini, and it's an amazing product as well.
you just linked product categories with data gravity, right? Where does your data live? And then these tools kind of do some things better, right? So 100%.
Right. I haven't heard both from organizations and kind of work that we've seen. We haven't heard Microsoft Copilot, and Microsoft Copilot technology is based on a lot of the OpenAI, the same technology as ChatGPT, but obviously there's a lot more integrations into the products. So Copilot could be a really interesting, in a lot of institutions, they're Microsoft shops, so they're giving access to Microsoft Copilot. That's a very easy, less intrusive way. What we hear over and over again is that Microsoft Copilot tries to do a lot, but it's not quite there yet. Maybe soon it will be there. Maybe it will kind of earn people's hearts and minds. But I love Benioff. Like a few months ago, he compares Microsoft Copilot to Clippy. So he's saying that Microsoft is kind of floundering again and kind of introducing Clippy 2.0. It's not quite there yet, but Microsoft, the Copilot platform has gone through some transformations. So we'll leave it at that, right? So if you're making a choice, ChatGPT EDU, amazing ecosystem. Your students and everybody will kind of thank you because everybody's using it from the consumer side on their own side. If you're locked into, if you're on the Google ecosystem, you shouldn't go to ChatGPT EDU. You should definitely do Gemini. There's no cost in there, no additional cost, and it kind of has deep integrations with the data that you already have. Agentic AI is opening a new chapter in higher education, making learning and engagement more responsive, adaptive, and personal. This October, Arizona State University is hosting Agentic AI and the Student Experience in Phoenix, with 500 leaders from across education and industry. The event will feature keynotes, workshops, and showcases, all centered on how this technology is transforming the student experience. Element 451 is proud to join as the digital storytelling media partner, helping capture and share what emerges from all of these insights. The registration link is in the show notes. I would not want to miss this. And then if you're a Microsoft shop, then you have to think about, okay, do I do Copilot or do I do ChatGPT, EDU? And that's kind of something that you have to think about. So that would be our recommendation if you look at those three categories. Obviously, a lot of people can come back and say, well, how about Anthropic or Claude or whatever? And that's going to be a preference departmentally as well. So you might not just standardize on one of these AI assistants. You might standardize on multiple, depending on the department or depending on the team that's actually using it, because ChatGPT can be really good for one thing, or you might have Copilot for one thing, but then your marketing team really loves Claude because it produces amazing copy and it does all of these different things. So let's move on from there to kind of the second category.
Yeah, actually, before we do the categories and the breakdown here, I just want to bring a step back because you just mentioned something really important. Marketing team wants this, they're used to that, right? And what happens in all these decisions, there's a lot of subjectivity, feelings, impressions, fandom, if you will, towards a product, right? And what we're going to be walking you through is 3 steps that all are going to lead into a scoring mechanism that we're proposing, right? Of how do you look at vendors objectively? Where step number 1 is you need to do apples to apples at product categories. Step number 2, we're going to walk you through like, these are the 5 questions you need to ask so that you can bring the scoring instead number 3 and score them objectively. So I just want to give that framework as we have in this conversation. We're going through step 1, categories, 2, the core questions, and then how do we bring it all together on scoring vendors objectively.
Yep, exactly. So the second category, like the copilots and embedded AI. So this is where we think about the copilot is the AI that lives in your tools. So wherever your tools are, the AI lives there. It's a copilot. It's either doing work in that particular product, or it's extending that product in some way, or it's making it more naturally. So here, we consider solutions that this could be. We talked about the Microsoft Copilot, but it's actually Microsoft Copilot. We put it in a category of copilots rather than just the general assistants, right? Because that you think it's kind of embedded in your tools, right? And also Gemini. So there's some solutions that kind of cross over to copilots as well. So Microsoft 360 Copilot it's probably one of the biggest ones in this category because they've tried to go for that Copilot or embed it within their tools, where a lot of campuses are using Teams environments, so Copilot is part of that environment. Or you can think about like where Canvas AI is being used today. So Canvas introduced Canvas AI, or there's D2L's similar AI features there as well. It also kind of, there's platform-specific copilots as well. So you think about Salesforce's AI features, before the agent, what they branded as Agentforce, it was called Einstein, and then there is some generative AI features in there. Element 451's Copilot, like our Bolt Copilot, it's essentially something that lives in the CRM and in the environment, and it lets you create campaigns. You can ask questions about students. You can do all of those things. So this is kind of the category in here. So when you think about the key vendors in this category, you think about Microsoft, Google, if you're using Google Workspace, the LMS companies or CRM providers like Salesforce, Element 451. I don't think any of the other folks like Lucien or Slate or some of the other like TargetX, I don't think they have any of these copilots embedded in their products. So they're really far behind in how they're thinking. HubSpot is another one that we've seen move things forward, but they're really embedded in the tools. Maybe some tools around the advising. We do that with Element 451, but there's some tools that might be advising tools that are now starting to do a little bit of this Copilot, but not really. So there's a very few players in this space that you think about copilots, but think about the vendors that you have in your tools and evaluate it from that perspective. Do this AI copilots in those tools, do they have them, not? And then decide if you want to replace the tool in this case, or decide. So this is going to be based on what tools you have, and for the workflows, do you need to replace those tools in order to get the Copilot capabilities that do more of that work? So that's usually how you think about this a lot more.
Just something to add on copilots. These are going to be medium lift, meaning as you go from assistants to copilots, know that now it's going to require more of you. As such, it's a higher contextual value, meaning the data gravity, the layers of data they need to support to be successful are higher.
They need to live in your data layer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's go to the third one of real transformation. This is where if you put in categories, so you can do the commentary of the kind of vendors out there, this is where you're saying, I'm going all in and I'm going for transformation, right? So workflow AI.
Yeah, I mean, so workflow AI or agentic solutions, there's fewer of these as well, right? And it's kind of a cutting edge category, but it's really growing. And when you think about these group platforms, it promises, not just promises, but it should deliver the end-to-end automation, right? And I'm going to use Element 451 Bolt agents, which obviously we know very deeply, but it focuses on, let's say, enrollment, student success workflows. Basically, like it can read applications, it can nudge students along, etc. But then there's a Salesforce. We talked about Salesforce Agentforce, right? So that's, it's Salesforce's kind of framework to build agents on top of their CRM. You also have HubSpot, which has been rolling out its AI to automate marketing and sales processes as well. Obviously, a lot of schools kind of use some of the marketing. We use HubSpot internally as well. We haven't really incorporated any of their AI just yet, but they're making a big push for that. You also think about, the agentic automation of like, how do you build agents internally? And there's a lot of platforms that you can start thinking about building agents. Agentic solutions and kind of agent building platforms I would consider them as two different things. A solution that you're looking at, it kind of comes out of the box and it says, okay, you just need to configure it for your institution and maybe write a couple of scripts. So it's giving you the purpose build, and if it's purpose built for higher education, it's even better. But then you have kind of point solutions in this space like that are, hey, we do this agentic workflow, but only for a specific use case. And that's where you have to evaluate it for that specific use case. So you have things like CollegeMind, for example, and they started with just the outbound recruiting part, and they have an agent that does phone calling and some qualifications there, some outreach. But that's a very, very niche use case, a very specific use case. Yes, they're introducing other use cases in there, but that's a little bit, different in terms of the kind of the platform play. And where we see things falling apart is, when people are using these and they need more data, it needs to understand the context of these users, and that's kind of where we see things falling apart a little bit. You also have other tools that focus on some of these things. It's like Halda, for example, in higher ed, they do some of the lead capture on your website, and they've started to introduce some AI. I don't know what to call them, some agentic stuff, but again, it's a kind of a point solution there for a specific use case. So it's not integrated. It's not part of the the ecosystem, so to speak. So those are some of the vendors that I would look. But then you have platforms that you can build agents on top of yourself, which are more non-vertical specific. They're more generic, and you have so many different options there. But in that case, you have to build the solution yourself because these platforms are very generic. Think about Microsoft. OpenAI introduced Agent Kit. We talked about during our last episode. So sure, a team internally at School X can implement a chatbot in there, a support chatbot to embed it on their website, but now they have to build it. They're just like a developer. They have to build their own UI, and they have to maintain it, and so on and so forth. It's not like a non-technical user can implement it. So a lot of these horizontal platforms, they're giving you a lot of tools to build these, but they don't know your business logic. They don't know your higher education. So they're going to be, let's say, they're going to give you 50%, but then you have to bring in 50% of the build yourself. Whereas if the platform is built specifically for higher ed, then it will give you 95%, and then there's 5% of configuration of how you make it your own, but the workflow is already built in there, like application review or fraud detection or student advising with different agents and outreach and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Hey, I think we're now making it a little longer and we have to cut other things. Let me do step number 2 really quick. And what you can do is combine step 3 and 2, and expand on the scoring. Does that sound like a
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
Right. Amazing. So step number 1 done. We have vendors group in categories, and you're going to go AI assistant. This is basically minimum integration, and you should have seen very fast type of return on the use cases in terms of time to value. When we look up copilots, medium lift, higher probably ROI, but more needs for integration, and you started touching on autonomy and governance, things of that sort. And last but not least, we spoke about this agentic or the workflow AI, where the biggest payoff, also the biggest involvement from your side. Apples to apples, 3 different buckets. Step number 2, it's the 5 questions you should be asking. Ardis, what I think will be fun is, let me just go through the questions very quickly so you can then start building the scoring mechanism, because there's a lot of context on how we think these are weighted. Not only we're talking about how to put it together, as engineers, we're going to try to score them and kind of give you a mathematical framework of how you look at this, and apples to apples becomes 50 over 60 or 70 over 45 and things of that sort. So number 1, the use case fit. Literally what we're talking about is show us how your AI, so you're talking to the vendor, solves my workflow or my use cases. No slides, no script. This is what I'm trying to solve. Match it, please. Number 2, the data gravity question. How is this turned into a question for your vendor? Where does your AI live, right? So does it read or does it write data into my CRM, Element 451? Does it write data into my SIS, into my chatbot technology, into my classroom management systems and things of that sort? Number 3, action surface. The question here is, hey, what actions is going to perform autonomous? None? Great. Half of them, these were goal-oriented and proactive, maybe will come in and throw it at you. So you need to start asking the questions of approvals, guardrails. Does it exist? Is it all in me? Do you have human in the loop? Those type of things. 4, adoption and support. So important, Ardis. Many of these projects fail on adoption and support. So what does success look like in 90 days? What does success look like in 180 days, right? Wait, what does success look like in a week? Think about those questions, right? And what are the adoption rates of your customers? Such an important question. What does adoption rate look like in your customers, right? And how many customers actually are using, the reach of your product? Last but not least, roadmap and ROI. Hey, time to value. We all, as vendors, Element, we all know our own metrics. And if they don't know it, that's a big flag. What is your time to value? Like, who's seeing measurable impact and how soon? And you start seeing how that is going to be a fantastic level. So with those 5 questions, let's score them and start building that scorecard for vendors, Ardis.
Yeah. So I would say that, if we're doing this right now, you'd say, okay, use case fit is probably the highest, and maybe that would be a 30% use case there. And then I would divide everything else equally amongst them, and the ROI potential and time to value, maybe you want to score that a little bit higher. So if you think about that, that's kind of how you would essentially go through and kind of divide the scoring there. So 30% towards, or 1/3 should be around the use case fit. Does it actually accomplish that? And then, could go down to maybe 15% around data gravity, like where does the data live, the autonomy. Autonomy is really important. And so a lot of schools are going to have different versions of this. Like they're going to value some things more than others, but I would certainly value the use case fit and the ROI and the time to value one of the highest.
Can I ask you a question there? And I think you're the right person to ask here. So I agree, a use case should be the biggest contributor here, and then we're suggesting about 1/3. When I look at the second layer, integration and data gravity, there's a really interesting dynamics here. If I look at product category number 1, it doesn't integrate with much. When I look at category number 3, it integrates with a lot of things. As the integration layer becomes more complex, do I put in more weight on the score or less weight on the score? Because this is where the systems codependence and where integrations, just so many stories. And we know of our partners, if you're hearing us, yes, it's hard. And there's some very difficult stories of integrations in all of us. You experience it, you and I, we've seen our partners sometimes experience it, telling stories that are horror stories. So how do you think about adjusting the score when the complexity of integration increases? Do you reduce the score or you actually put more weight on it?
Yeah, so that's really depends on what kind of solution and what kind of category you're looking at. Because if you're looking for an AI platform, the assumption here is that the AI platform that is a standalone will kind of have a lot of the data context embedded into that platform. So when you're buying a point solution, then you have to put more weight towards the integration. It's like, does it integrate with this or that or whatever, my CRM, et cetera, et cetera. But if the platform is kind of fully on its own, it can do a lot of these things without having to reach into different systems, because it can kind of has the different tools in there. It can have the different context. And where we see a lot of value is where Element 451 is kind of the system of actions for everything. But sure, we can reach out and pull data from the SIS in real time and some of the other CRMs and other data sources if we need to. We have those integrations baked in, and we have the role-based controls and everything. That's kind of when you're evaluating point solutions, those things make a lot more sense. The integration and data gravity for sure.
100%. I would love for you to expand on user adoption and support, which is our 4th question, and ROI, potential time to value, which is the 5th question, right? And right now, to recap, biggest contributor to your scorecard should be use case. Depending on integration issues, you need to have that dynamics. But many of these technology partners, Ardis, they're new. Awesome startups, right? Companies like us, we've been doing this for a long time, so we have reps. So what is the difference, and how does it translate beyond the feature, showcase, which could be nothing behind the scene? I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just talking about how much they know their customer. Some of the things in adoption and ROI is that because in our case, we have more than 300 partners, so we understand where they're struggling, kind of what is the time to value, where there's impact, all the kind of watch outs, and where do you double down on success? How do you advise folks here to think about vendors when it comes to user adoption, support, and time to value when it's that nascent, promising company, but they don't have the reps. And by that, I mean the data points from their clients.
Yeah. I mean, so the support is super important, right? And because like the way you evaluate is like how easy will it be for your users to adopt this tool, and how much support will the vendor provide for you. So if a tool is intuitive and can be embedded in existing systems, then score it really well. If the tool is actually embedded in the system itself, it's really important for that. So if it requires users to learn a whole new interface, or a vendor that has basically a handoff approach after the sale, score it really low. Like think about the support, like how how they handle support. Also factor in training, documentation, and the vendor's experience. Like we basically talked about. So training, documentation, but the vendor's experience with change management in campuses, and if they've done that before, and how they handle it, and what's the support, that is super important, because most of it, like we talked about, most of these projects fail not because of the technology, but they always fail because of that change management. If the vendor doesn't have the experience or the backing to say, hey, here's how we did it for this school, here's how we did it for that school, and has that credibility and actually able to do the change management, it usually fails.
I just leave everybody with what happens when you apply these 3 steps is that you would have a conversation that sounds like apples to apples comparison. So vendor A score 8.5 out of 10 versus vendor B 6 out of 10. And all of a sudden and why? Well, you know why? Because the vendor B who score lower, they just don't do really well against our SI integration, right? And because of that, vendor A is selected. That's basically the framework that we just presented, and hopefully gives you the opportunity to come and localize, contextualize these rubrics for home. But Ardis, I'm looking forward to this part of the conversation, which is kind of towards the end. But just yesterday, we had a wonderful kickoff for our summit, and we had Lev, one of our partners from ASU, and you've seen their approach to AI. And a lot of it is built at home. Some of you, schools, us included, when you were at NYU, you built stuff. So the conversation is off the shelf. How do I start thinking about all this framework for vendors? But now I have one more layer of complexity. I can build it because I have an engineering team, I have a product team, whatever, in the context in how AI transforms, kind of time to value, those type of things. And I know that now I'm leveling one more dimension, which is built at home, done at home versus off-the-shelf vendors. All right, let's go.
Yeah. So with this whole thing is like, how do you buy AI? And now we're talking about, what happens if you're like, well, maybe I want to buy a platform that I want to build on top of. The thing that we didn't ask Lev is like, well, what's your budget for this stuff? Like, what's your
$1 billion?
Exactly.
It has to be. It's incredible.
Exactly. And it's like, how much of that is failing,
Yeah, but also it's probably the amount of partnership that they have. They are thriving on as a use case of
this is Arizona State University we're talking about. Lev Gonik, which is the CIO at Arizona State University, give us a lot of those use cases, and they're actually using a lot of different tools. So they're buying. They're not exclusive to one assistant or another. They're building their own agents internally or their own agent platforms, but they're building products essentially internally, which requires a lot of money, requires a lot of resources and maintenance, and those products can get outdated pretty quickly. So they have to keep up with everything that's happening. And there's also no throat to choke, right? Basically, that's the old adage when it comes to vendors, like one throat to choke, so to speak. Consolidation, you know who to go to for if something goes wrong, and accountability. In higher ed, we don't do a lot of accountability, so there's a lot of internal teams that are very eager to build. But like you said, I build a lot of stuff at NYU. But at the end of the day, my CFO that I was reporting to or the chief of staff was not evaluating me based on performance on those products. They were just like, oh, this is great. It's amazing. Like, we have you here, so we might as well just use you to build these things. They were not evaluating it from, is it actually delivering value? Is it actually like, what happens when Ardis leaves? Like, who's going to maintain these things? And that's exactly what happened. It's like I was doing things that I loved to work on. I wanted to work on the new technologies, and I was building them. But then when I left, like 6 months later, those things weren't around anymore. And it's like, okay, that's the big weight here, the build versus buy, in terms of how you're building. Do you have the capabilities in-house? And then what's the maintainability? What is all of that?
Well, and this is not a conversation about how do you build good AI. It's the strategic decision of you buy versus you build, right? And I think the point of tech dev and sustaining it and whatnot, it's super important, Ardis. But there's something about if at home I have the capabilities, right? Can we just have a conversation about what would I be considering in my rubric, right? Should I not go to a vendor? Because maybe I have these solutions. Like when I think about the build versus buy strategic decision, what do you think our partners should be thinking about for saying, you know what, I'm definitely need to double down on vendors here and I apply the scorecard I just presented, or I'm actually going to go in locally and I'm going to ask young Ardis to build this thing for me. And hopefully he will not leave and sustain it for a long time. What can we say to our people on that strategic decision?
I guess the answer depends on the goals, resources, and the risk tolerance that you have. So you have to look at it from those three different areas. So if you weigh in all those factors, right? You think about the kind of the goals that you have. It really depends on kind of, are you trying to prove a concept? Are you trying to build something very quickly that you want to maintain and you want to expand? And like there's no solutions out there in the market. So your goal is to experiment quickly or to have something that is, like a one-time use or so you have to think about that, right? And then the other part is like you think about resources, right? So partnering, do you have the resources? Like I said, do you have just one person that's really excited about this? And there's a lot that goes into a product. And then the risk tolerance as well is like, are you okay with not like bypassing a lot of the testing and a lot of the security components and all that? So when a vendor comes in, they have to have all those things in check. Whereas with internal resources, you don't have a product security that that looks at from a security perspective. You don't have a lot of the checks and balances in place. So universities are ultimately not product companies. So you can build these POCs and you can build proof of concepts really quickly and you can build them, but for the long-term longevity, it's a lot easier to kind of bring them in. And essentially what that MIT report said is that companies and institutions partnering with specialized AI vendors succeeded 67% of the time, while purely internal AI projects succeeded about 1/3 as often, right? So it was half of the projects being built internally so that they aligned, whereas with vendors, they succeeded more than 2/3 of the time or 67%. So think about that, the support, the upgrades, compliance handling, and so on and so forth.
One of the things I know from this, it's that when we think about build versus buy, it isn't about code and technology. It's about culture. And this is where risk tolerance and the partnership is super important. Last thing I would say here, Ardis, when I look at the framework you represented, it still holds. If I'm talking to young Ardis, our website, it's a disaster. And here you come with, I think it was Drupal, a Drupal solution for us.
Yeah, it was great.
Here are the use cases, Ardis. This is how we do events. And I remember you didn't know how admissions or enrollment management did events. And then here's the use cases, right? And then number two, the integration. Like, do you need to connect to your event management system? You need to connect to, the deposit system because we're going to collect deposits in this open house. I don't know. And then the autonomy and the governance and the adoption and the potential time to value, all those things still hold. Probably where in this risk conversation, things that nobody knows is user adoption and support or potential time to value. It's unknown because obviously this is a first and an internal team is not deployed to do that. If anything, the onus is on you to even support it more. And this is probably why in your data that you mentioned, the probability of success and ROI, it's lower with home-built solutions.
Yeah. So JC, I know we're going to wrap this episode up where we ran a little bit long on this one. And there is one more topic, and maybe we'll have this as kind of a follow-up or we'll have a different conversation. But this notion of context and the importance of context and data. This is super, super important. And for us who are in the know and who are building AI solutions right now, we call this context engineering. But we want to demystify this a little bit and think about it through that lens of so we can spend 5 minutes to do it right now. But I feel like it's so important because context engineering and data is going to be so important. 2026 is all going to be about the winners and losers of kind of the AI solutions. It's all going to be about context and context engineering. Like, what's the ecosystem of data? How are you bringing the data in? So that's a theme that we repeated over and over. And this theme about AI is only as good as the data and the context that you feed it. It's like so much more important today, where everybody has access to the same models, the same intelligence. Like, what makes my AI different than another one? So something to think about. Do you want to like take 2 minutes and start to think about that, or
Of
are
course,
we?
let's build it, and so everybody don't jump off yet, because all the things that we discuss about lift and how much effort is going to take, context and data probably is what allows you to understand and quantify lift, right? Because how much content, as good as your context, probably the better use cases and personalization, and like the more meaningful your AI deployment looks like, aka your transformation. So yes, let's take our whatever number of minutes, but I think it's an important one. So good call out, Ardis.
Yeah. So when you think about, essentially, like in higher ed, you have like these key data systems, and typically it's the CRM, which kind of houses prospective students, enrollment data, maybe kind of student success data, the SIS for student records, courses, grades, and the LMS for, again, course content and engagement. And those are the sources of truth. And kind of we often refer to these as kind of the source of the system of record, right? And in AI solutions that cannot access these, they will be operating with blinders. Think about, they'll be operating with blinders on. So imagine kind of a student-facing AI system that's a prospective student is asked, do I have an outstanding documents for my application? Now, if that assistant is not plugged into that data, so if that AI has the context via maybe an integration with the application system, or it's embedded and it's part of that, just like Element AI Bolt is being built on top of the Element CRM, it can answer specifically, yes, you're missing like the second recommendation letter, and here's how to submit it. But if it doesn't have access to that, it cannot answer that. So if it lacks the context, it will give a very generic answer. It will say, please contact admissions to find out. So the difference in kind of the student experience is night and day here. So the latter is essentially a dead end, right? So not much better than an FAQ page. And this is where you really stress that data gravity in kind of what we talked about. So AI needs to live near your data to deliver real transformation. It needs to live in your data, near your data, in your tools in order to deliver that. Consider two real examples. ChatGPT EDU, which is a general assistant, and it's deployed by some universities, but I mean, it's a great tool for general support. Students can ask it to explain concepts and draft essays and get advice and so on and so forth. But what can't it do? It can't check a student's class schedule, or look up their financial aid status, or send a reminder, a task reminder on your behalf, because it's not integrated with any of the campus systems. So you had zero data gravity to your environment. And when universities like, for example, we've talked about in the past, and we've brought in the Vanderbilt University use cases, but he recognized that limitation, and that's partly why Vanderbilt built their Amplify platform, because it was an internal generative AI platform that uses the GPT models, but it keeps the data in-house, and it has access to those different systems. Now you can go ahead and build it yourself, or you can use go work with a vendor like Element or Salesforce or whatever to bring that agentic interface in. So that's kind of how we should be thinking about it. So the takeaway here is, so if AI can't access your system of record, it cannot deliver true transformational value. So it might deliver convenience or efficiency in a narrow sense, but not the kind of ROI that shows up in, when you're talking about retention numbers and enrollment numbers. And that's kind of what, in fact, that's what that MIT study on AI failures noted, a misalignment in where companies invest in AI versus where the ROI actually is, right? It found that the biggest gains came from back office automation and operations, right, which rely on deep integrations and basically having that. Whereas many were, but a lot of money was spent on more kind of the superficial use cases, right? It's like, write me this email or more of the AI assistance. So in higher ed, think of back office or the more complex workflows like application management and review and fraud detection and outbound, reach to all those students automatically, financial aid verification, like how do you do transcript evaluations? Like all of those things are super important, and they really move the needle on the student outcome and efficiency. And that requires a lot of the context, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So I'll leave it at that, and then maybe to drive this home, a CFO technology survey found that 85% of business leaders cited data quality integration issues as the primary concern of AI implementation. So you hit the nail in the head, JC. That's like, yes, the perception is if the data and this AIs don't have access to the data, they cannot do more of the complex workflows and deliver the ROI that they need. And again, the promise here is that if we centralize all these different systems and we kind of have something that's more of a platform play, the ROI is much, much bigger.
Well, friends, there you have it. I hope today as you hang on with us, you went from curiosity to clarity, right? All of us are curious about how AI comes to our homes, teams, departments, institutions, and bring change, right? But the clarity is needed. And the conversation today is, how do you evaluate AI vendors? How do you weight their path to success in terms of integration, in terms of data layers, in terms of adoption, ROI, and how do you choose widely? Ardis, for next time, episode 3, we're going to tackle probably one of the hardest parts, and we're going even deeper in our journey, right? So what happens after you buy or you build, right? And we start seeing these rates of adoption plummet, rates of success even plummet. And one of the important things of episode 3, it's POC build out. So Ardis, teaser on what is happening in the next episode, please.
Yeah, so this is where we're going to talk about POCs and we proof of concepts. And you can call them pilots, you can call them proof of concepts, but this technology is very new, so you don't know how it's going to give you the ROI. You don't want to make multi-year decisions in here. So how do you run a really good POC? And we see this over and over again. Vendors don't know it. Institutions don't know it. The buyer doesn't know it. So we're going to go into depth we're going to go through and kind of evaluate and how we think about go from POC to action, right? So we want to make that AI stick. So that's what we're going to focus on episode number 3. And it's going to be a shorter one, obviously, than this one, where we kind of talked a lot about a lot of things, but that should be a little bit more focused for sure.
Indeed, because the goal is not to experiment with AI. If you understand us, if you hear us, you know that it's all about kind of brain transformation, right? And we know that it has to be institutionalized at home, campus, your team. So I'm excited about episode number 3. And Ardis, thank you so much for your contributions as always. Sign us off, my friend.
All right, everyone. Till next time. Generation AI is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you're going to like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing weekly, and we've got a wide range of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed leaders and professionals like you find their next big idea. They feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts, like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Brian Gross, and many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that's helping institutions all over the country create meaningful, personalized, and engaging connections with their prospects and students. Learn more at element451.com.